What if the place we're told will set us free is actually designed to keep us in line? School, the grand temple of knowledge, the training ground for young minds, the cornerstone of a better future. Or so we're told. But look a little closer. What are we really being taught? Sure, there are equations and historical dates, grammar rules and scientific facts, but beneath that there's another layer, quieter, subtler, and far more powerful. We're being trained to follow orders, to raise our hands before speaking, to repeat rather than rethink. It's less about learning how to think and more about learning how to obey. Ask the wrong questions, color outside the lines, challenge the curriculum, and you're a problem. Isn't it strange that an institution supposedly built to expand minds so often rewards narrow thinking? School prepares us for the world, yes, but what kind of world? One where we sit still, say yes, and never wonder why. This video is not a rant against teachers or classrooms. It's an invitation to rethink the script. Because if education is supposed to liberate us, why does it feel so much like training for a life of polite submission? Let's pull back the curtain. The illusion of education. Let's begin with a seemingly innocent question. What is education supposed to do? Most people would say something like, teach us how to think, prepare us for life, or maybe the classic, help us reach our full potential. And yet, if you step into almost any school around the world, what you'll find looks less like a place of growth and more like a factory, one that mass produces uniformity, obedience, and just enough knowledge to make you functional, but not too dangerous. You're not really being educated, you're being processed. The structure of modern schooling is designed less around learning and more around control. Think about the bells that ring to start and end every class, the way desks are lined up in perfect rows, the way students have to raise their hands to speak, ask to go to the bathroom, follow a dress code, memorize a fixed curriculum, and complete standardized tests. From the age of 5, children are conditioned to follow orders, respond to authority, and internalize the idea that success comes from doing what you're told. We call this education, but it sounds suspiciously like training. Not for freedom, but for conformity. We reward the students who remember what they're told, who follow instructions well, who can regurgitate definitions without questioning their meaning. We call them excellent. We send them to better colleges. But rarely do we ask, do they understand what they're saying? Do they know how to apply it outside a test? Can they see the bigger picture, or just the multiple choice answers in front of them? Meanwhile, the kid who asks, why are we even learning this, is labeled as a distraction. The one who doesn't do homework because she spent the evening thinking about the implications of the lesson, she's lazy. And the boy who reads 3 books a week but can't stand worksheets, he's unfocused. We punish the very behaviors that real learning depends on: questioning, curiosity, and creative resistance. The truth is, school teaches you to memorize, not to think. The difference is crucial. Memorization is mechanical. It's about retention, not reflection. Thinking, on the other hand, is slow, messy. It asks you to sit with uncertainty, to compare ideas, to entertain contradictions, and in a system obsessed with efficiency, there's no time for that. There are exams to pass, rankings to maintain, data to collect. Real thinking is inconvenient for the machine. And so instead of intellectual exploration, we get repetition. Instead of discussion, we get lectures. Instead of meaning, we get grades. The grade, by the way, is a brilliant psychological trick. It's not a reflection of your intelligence. It's a reflection of how well you played the game. It turns learning into a competition, knowledge into currency. Want a good life? Then get good grades. Want respect? Get straight A's. No one tells you that some of the most thoughtful, creative minds struggled in school. Because school isn't built for them. It's built for those who can adapt to instruction, not those who challenge its foundation. Let's talk about content. What exactly are we learning? A predetermined set of subjects: math, science, history, language. Sounds reasonable until you realize how narrow the scope actually is. You'll learn about wars, but not about peace building. You'll study Shakespeare, but not how to express your own voice. You'll know the parts of a cell, but not the parts of your psyche. You'll write essays analyzing other people's ideas, but rarely be asked to form your own. In many ways, it's an education in silence. And then there's the mythology that education is a great equalizer. The idea is noble, but the execution is laughable. A child in an underfunded school with 40 kids in a classroom, outdated textbooks, and overworked teachers is not getting the same education as the kid in a private school with personalized attention and access to enrichment programs. We pretend school is a meritocracy, but it's more like a performance of fairness, designed to make people believe they had the same shot, when really, the game was rigged before it began. But let's not only blame the system. The deeper question is, why was it built this way? The answer is inconvenient. Modern schooling was never designed to nurture critical, independent thinkers. It was built during the Industrial Revolution to produce reliable workers, people who could show up on time, follow instructions, and do repetitive tasks without complaint. That model hasn't changed much. We've swapped the factory floor for office cubicles, but the training is eerily similar. Punctuality, obedience, predictability, the perfect employee, or the perfect citizen, depending on what you need. Of course, there are teachers who resist this, who encourage dialogue, spark wonder, and allow students to grow into themselves. They are the rebels within the system. But they are working uphill, often against rigid curricula, administrative pressure, and limited resources. The system doesn't support them. It tolerates them, just enough to maintain the illusion of possibility. And perhaps that's the most dangerous part of all, the illusion. Because it's one thing to know you're being controlled. It's quite another to be told you're being liberated while it happens. School is sold as the path to freedom. But how free can you be when every hour of your day is scheduled? When every idea you explore is pre-selected? When your worth is tied to how well you comply? This doesn't mean all schools are bad, or that education isn't valuable. But we need to stop confusing schooling with learning. Learning is natural, messy, and unpredictable. It happens when you're curious, when you make mistakes, when you're allowed to follow your interests and connect the dots on your own. Learning is what happens when you read something that changes the way you see the world. Not because it was assigned, but because it mattered to you. Real education should awaken, not anesthetize. It should encourage doubt, nourish imagination, and expand the capacity for empathy and reason. But as long as we cling to a model that rewards passivity over passion, compliance over courage, we'll continue producing people who know how to follow rules, but not how to rewrite them. And maybe that's exactly the point. The hidden curriculum: walk into any classroom and you'll see the lesson plan on the board. Math problems, essay prompts, a science project. But that's just the surface. The real lessons, the ones that shape us far more deeply, aren't listed anywhere. They're not in the textbooks or on the tests. They're embedded in the structure, the routine, the silent expectations. This is what sociologists call the hidden curriculum, and it's often more powerful than the official one. The hidden curriculum teaches you how to behave in systems. It rewards you not just for getting the right answer, but for getting it in the right way. Quietly, on time, without challenging the format. You learn how to sit still, even when your mind is racing. How to repeat what you've been told, even if it makes no sense. How to smile when you're bored. How to conform without even noticing. You don't need a lecture on obedience. The structure itself teaches it. The lesson is simple. Follow the rules, and you'll be fine. And this lesson starts early. Think about it. Children enter school as curious creatures, constantly asking why, experimenting with the world, making connections that adults overlook. Within a few years, many of them have learned to suppress that instinct. Why? Becomes, will this be on the test? Exploration is replaced by expectation. The joy of discovery is swapped out for the pressure to perform. The system doesn't explicitly tell them to stop wondering, it just makes it inconvenient. You're also taught that authority is something to obey, not question. The teacher knows everything, the principal is untouchable, and rules are rules, whether or not they make sense. If you're 5 minutes late, you're penalized. If you finish your work early and want to explore a new topic, you're told to sit quietly until the bell. The message is clear. Initiative is nice, but compliance is safer. Another unspoken lesson. Your value is external. It lives in grades, scores, rankings. You don't learn to trust your instincts. You learn to seek validation. You don't ask yourself, did I understand this? You ask, did I get an A? And so begins the slow erosion of intrinsic motivation. You stop reading because you're interested. You start reading because there's a quiz. The system teaches you not to ask if something is meaningful, just if it's required. And let's talk about competition. From a young age, you're pitted against your peers. Top of the class, highest score, best project. As if learning were a race with one finish line and one winner. Collaboration becomes secondary, maybe even dangerous. Why help someone who might beat you? You're trained to measure yourself not by who you are, but by how you compare to others. That's not just a recipe for stress. It's a blueprint for lifelong insecurity. But perhaps the most subtle lesson is about conformity. Schools don't just teach content, they teach culture. What's considered normal behavior? What counts as success? Which dreams are valid and which are distractions? Students quickly learn which identities are celebrated and which are quietly discouraged. The artistic kid who wants to be a poet, that's nice, but how about a real career? The student who questions the rules too often. Smart, but troublemaker. Over time, these judgments shape the way students see themselves and limit what they believe they're allowed to become. Even creativity is boxed in. You're encouraged to be creative, but only inside the assignment. Write an original story, but make sure it's 5 paragraphs, double-spaced, in Times New Roman. Draw something imaginative, but don't make a mess. Follow your passion, as long as it fits the schedule. In this environment, freedom becomes another word for permission. And real creativity, the kind that challenges assumptions and breaks rules, is quietly filed under disruptive behavior. The irony, of course, is that we praise innovators and visionaries, the ones who defied the script. But we design schools to produce the opposite. We tell students to think for themselves, but reward them for thinking like everyone else. We celebrate Einstein, but forget he hated school. We quote Steve Jobs, but ignore that he dropped out. We worship rebels, but raise children to be obedient. And so, after 12 or 16 years of this training, students leave school not as independent thinkers, but as well-behaved performers. They know how to pass exams, follow rules, meet deadlines. But do they know how to navigate uncertainty? How to question systems? How to build lives that reflect their values, not just society's demands? That's not part of the hidden curriculum. That's the part it forgets, perhaps on purpose. Because a society of compliant citizens is easier to manage than a society of thoughtful critics. It's easier to run a workplace where people follow instructions than one full of individuals who ask why things are done a certain way. The hidden curriculum doesn't just prepare students for school, it prepares them for a world where challenging authority is discouraged, where standing out feels risky, and where success is defined by fitting in. But here's the twist. The hidden curriculum is only powerful as long as it's hidden. Once you see it, you can start to resist it. You can reclaim your curiosity, redefine your value, question the rules, not just follow them. That's when real education begins, not when you memorize what others want you to know, but when you start unlearning what they needed you to believe. Suppression of critical thinking. They say education is supposed to teach you how to think, but what they don't say is that there are boundaries, unspoken fences, around the kind of thinking that's acceptable. You can think, yes, but not too differently. You can question, but not too loudly. You can challenge ideas, so long as they're not the ones holding the entire system together. Welcome to the managed chaos of critical thinking, school style. It starts subtly. You're praised for asking questions, but only if the questions have neat answers. Ask your math teacher why we even need to learn this formula, and you'll be told, it's on the test. Raise your hand in history class to ask whether the textbook version of events reflects everyone's experience, and you'll likely get an awkward pause followed by, let's stay on topic. The message is clear. Curiosity is fine, but don't make it inconvenient. Think critically, just not critically of the institution you're in. Schools often pride themselves on teaching debate, analysis, reasoning, but what they rarely encourage is real intellectual risk. Real thinking means embracing ambiguity, examining power, and sitting with discomfort. It means accepting that sometimes there isn't a right answer, or worse, that the right answer isn't the one you were taught. That's dangerous territory for a system built on standardization and predictability. It introduces mess into a place designed for order. Consider the structure of a typical assignment. You're given a prompt, expected to write a certain number of paragraphs, use the correct format, cite the correct sources. What happens if you find a better way to approach, not because your thinking was wrong, but because it was hard to measure? In school, thinking is only rewarded if it can be quantified, and what can't be scored doesn't survive. Then there's the psychological side. Students quickly learn that challenging ideas can carry social consequences. You're argumentative, you're too intense, you're making things difficult. Better to smile, nod, and echo what's already been said. After all, the goal isn't to understand, it's to win approval. And so we condition students to be agreeable, to seek affirmation, to avoid the friction that real thought often creates. We tell them they're learning to think for themselves, while training them to fear standing alone. Even the subjects that seem open to thought, philosophy, literature, social studies, are often taught within narrow frameworks. You study Plato, but only certain dialogues. You read novels, but interpret them through guided questions. There's room for opinion, but only within the lanes the teacher lays out. It's thinking on a leash. You can roam a little, but don't pull too hard. And this leash gets tighter over time. In early childhood, kids are encouraged to wonder, why is the sky blue? What if animals could talk? It's adorable. But as they grow older, the focus shifts to outcomes. Tests, rankings, college readiness. Wonder gets replaced by worry. Questions that once sparked excitement now feel like a waste of time. By the time they're teenagers, many students have internalized the idea that thinking too much is a liability, that school is not a place to explore, but a place to perform. This isn't just a missed opportunity, it's a crisis. Because critical thinking isn't just a nice skill, it's what allows people to see through propaganda, to resist manipulation, to navigate complexity, to be free. When students aren't taught to evaluate evidence, recognize bias, or question authority, they become easy targets for misinformation, for dogma, for systems that benefit from their silence. The irony is that the world we're preparing them for demands exactly those skills. We live in an age of information overload, algorithmic echo chambers, and ideological warfare. The ability to think clearly, independently, and ethically has never been more important. And yet we're graduating students who are fluent in memorization but illiterate in discernment, who can summarize an article but can't detect the agenda behind it, who can solve equations but can't solve real-life dilemmas. Why is this happening? Because real thinking takes time, and time is something school doesn't have. There's a curriculum to get through, benchmarks to hit, exams to pass. A student who lingers too long on a big idea becomes an inconvenience. So we rush them along, box them in, reward speed over depth, answers over insight. We turn learning into a sprint and wonder why no one reaches the finish line wiser. Let's be clear, this isn't the fault of individual teachers. Many of them long to foster genuine inquiry, but they're trapped too, by standardized tests, administrative expectations, rigid syllabi. The system itself is allergic to complexity. It needs predictability, and true critical thinking is anything but predictable. So what happens? Students learn to play the game, to write what the teacher wants to hear, to use the buzzwords, follow the template, fill in the blanks. They get good at thinking the way school wants them to. But real thought, the kind that shakes the ground a little, gets buried, or worse, forgotten entirely. But here's the quiet truth. Thinking can't be killed. It can be delayed, discouraged, buried under deadlines, but not destroyed. And every so often, a spark survives. A student reads something off the syllabus and it sticks. They ask a forbidden question and can't unhear the answer. They realize that education isn't something given to them. It's something they can reclaim. That's when school becomes something else. Not a place of suppression, but of awakening. Not a system of repetition, but a space for resistance. But for that to happen, we have to stop pretending that critical thinking is alive and well in our classrooms. We have to admit that it's been marginalized and then fight to bring it back. Because in the end, the goal of education shouldn't be to produce well-behaved graduates. It should be to create people who are dangerous to ignorance, who ask better questions, who make better decisions, who, when faced with the easy answer or the hard truth, have the courage to think it through. Emotional intelligence, the missing piece. For all the emphasis schools place on IQ, on test scores, academic ability, and mental discipline, it's stunning how little they say about emotions. You can graduate with honors and still not know how to handle heartbreak. You can ace every exam and still fall apart the moment life throws you something unscripted. Why? Because emotional intelligence isn't part of the curriculum. It's not on the standardized tests. It doesn't fit neatly into a grading rubric. And so it gets pushed aside, treated like a luxury instead of a necessity. But let's be honest, what derails most people in life isn't their inability to solve an equation or diagram a sentence. It's their inability to manage anger, handle stress, recover from failure, or speak honestly in a relationship. It's the stuff of being human, and school rarely touches it. Sure, there might be the occasional anti-bullying poster or mindfulness moment on Monday morning, but those are surface fixes for a system that doesn't truly acknowledge emotional complexity. You're not taught how to process grief. You're not taught how to sit with anxiety or to name shame or to apologize with sincerity. You're told to behave, and behaving in this context means emotional suppression. Don't cry, don't talk back, don't show too much joy, don't show too much pain. Just be neutral, manageable, quiet. The emotional spectrum gets flattened into a narrow zone of what's appropriate. Students who fall outside that zone, too sensitive, too angry, too withdrawn, are pathologized. They're treated as problems to fix, not people to understand. Even the language of feelings is absent. Ask a teenager how they feel and you'll often hear a vague "I'm fine" or whatever. Not because they don't feel deeply, but because they were never taught to articulate it. Emotional illiteracy isn't a personal failure, it's a collective omission. And that omission has consequences. Students enter adulthood with impressive resumes but fragile egos. They know how to network but not how to connect. They can debate ideas but can't express needs. They know how to perform but not how to be vulnerable. And here's the kicker. Emotional intelligence isn't just soft skills fluff. It's the foundation of good decision-making. Neuroscience shows that emotion and cognition are inseparable. Your feelings affect how you think, what you prioritize, how you remember. A student who is emotionally dysregulated, anxious, ashamed, resentful, is not in an ideal state to learn. Yet we often treat those emotions as distractions to ignore, rather than signals to explore. We tell students to get over it, rather than let's talk about it. Imagine a system that took those inner experiences seriously, that treated them as central to growth, not peripheral. Emotional intelligence is also the key to leadership, to relationships, to resilience, to creativity. And it's not something you're born with or without. It can be taught through honest conversations, reflective practices, mentorship, and modeling. But that requires time, intention, and space to be messy. School isn't built for that kind of mess. It's built for measurable outcomes. And so we prioritize the visible and ignore the invisible. We measure what we can, pretend the rest doesn't matter. Now there are programs trying to change this. Social emotional learning, SEL, is gaining traction in some places. But even then, it's often treated as an afterthought, a box to check off between test prep and attendance. What's missing is a cultural shift, a recognition that students are not just minds, they're whole people. An education that doesn't touch the heart is incomplete, because at the end of the day, students will forget most of what they memorized, but they won't forget how school made them feel, whether they were seen or ignored, respected or dismissed, whether their fears were met with compassion or contempt. Those experiences shaped their sense of self far more than any grade ever could. So what would it look like to take emotional intelligence seriously? It would mean making space for reflection, for naming emotions without judgment, for understanding conflict instead of punishing it. It would mean shifting from control to connection, from compliance to care. It would mean teaching students not just how to win, but how to lose gracefully. Not just how to lead, but how to listen. Not just how to compete, but how to cooperate. It would mean reminding them again and again that their worth isn't in their GPA, their extracurriculars, or their college acceptance letters, but in how they treat themselves and others. And no, that wouldn't always be easy. Emotions are messy, unpredictable, slow, but that's the point. If school isn't preparing students for that reality, what exactly is it preparing them for? The path forward. After all this critique, After unpacking the obedience, the suppression, the emotional neglect, you might be wondering, is there a better way? Can education be saved from itself? Or is school just a necessary evil we all have to survive and then unlearn later in therapy? The answer is complicated, but let's be clear about one thing. The system we have isn't sacred. It was built by people, for specific economic and political reasons, and it can be rebuilt. First, we have to reclaim the purpose of education, not as job training, not as obedience conditioning, but as a space for the development of fully alive, thinking, feeling human beings. Education should begin with questions, not answers. Who are you? What kind of world do you want to live in? What does it mean to be free? These aren't just philosophical games, they're the foundation of every decision we make. If school doesn't help us grapple with those questions, what exactly is it for? So how do we build something better? We start by shifting the focus from performance to process, from product to person. Education should be about learning how to learn, not just once, but over a lifetime. That means encouraging curiosity, nurturing doubt, and celebrating questions that don't have easy answers. Teachers become guides, not authorities. Classrooms become laboratories of ideas, not lecture halls of compliance. Assessment shifts from "did you get it right" to "what did you discover?" We integrate emotional intelligence into the core, not as an add-on but as essential. We teach students how to name what they feel, how to navigate failure, how to listen with empathy. We talk about conflict, forgiveness, boundaries, power. We model self-awareness, because the emotional landscape is not something to avoid, it's the terrain of being human. An education that ignores that terrain is not education. It's theater. We abandon the myth that every student needs the same thing at the same time in the same way. That's not equality. It's sameness masquerading as fairness. Real equity means recognizing difference. It means flexible pacing, diverse materials, varied assessments. A student who learns through stories shouldn't be measured the same way as one who thinks in equations. When we treat all students identically, we deny them the dignity of being individuals. We also democratize the classroom, not just by letting students vote on the homework policy, but by giving them real voice in what and how they learn. We let them co-create the syllabus. We treat them as thinkers, not recipients. We encourage them to challenge us, respectfully, critically, boldly. Because if students can't question their own teachers, how will they ever question a broken law, a corrupt leader, or an unjust system? And we stop pretending that learning only happens inside classrooms. Life itself is the greatest curriculum. So we break down the walls, literally and metaphorically. We connect students with the world, with artists, activists, entrepreneurs, scientists, farmers. We let them solve real problems, build real things, ask real people real questions. Education stops being preparation for life and becomes life itself. Of course, none of this is easy. It requires courage, from teachers, from parents, from policymakers. It requires us to let go of the comforting illusion of control, to admit that we don't always know what's best, to trust in the mess of real growth. It means choosing transformation over tradition. And yes, it will be slower, it will be harder to measure, but maybe that's the point, because the things that matter most, kindness, resilience, wonder, moral courage, don't show up on a Scantron. They don't fit on a report card, but they shape the world more than any grade point average ever will. This isn't a fantasy. Pockets of this future already exist. Small schools, progressive programs, daring teachers doing the work. But they need support, they need space. They need us to stop worshiping a system that clearly isn't working and start building one that could. Because the old model, standardized, test-driven, fear-based, isn't just outdated, it's dangerous. It produces citizens who don't know how to think, who don't know how to feel, who are smart enough to run the machines, but too conditioned to ask what the machines are doing. That's not education. That's indoctrination. The path forward is not a return to the past or a slight tweak of the present. It's a reimagining, a radical shift, a new story about what it means to grow, to learn, to be fully alive. And it starts now. Education should be a journey of discovery, not a process of indoctrination. By acknowledging the limitations of our current system, we open the door to meaningful change. Let's advocate for an educational paradigm that values critical thinking, emotional growth, and individuality. Only then can we prepare future generations for the complexities of life beyond the classroom. If this perspective resonates with you, consider sharing this video to spark conversations about educational reform. Subscribe for more content that challenges conventional thinking and explores paths to personal and societal growth. Together, we can reimagine education to better serve individuals and communities alike.